Chapter 22. Serena's Lab. The Present. Serena frowned at the newly decanted pair of Terminators standing dripping on her improvised laboratory floor amid the musky smells of the nutrient bath and the scent of damp concrete. Because she had needed them so quickly, she'd put some of the tissue accelerant into their nutrient baths. Perhaps a little too much. They looked like weather-beaten men in their mid to late 30s, but they'd come out with full heads of hair and beards and a full crop of body hair, which was a convenience. She walked around the two, no gaps, no flaws, but something niggled at her. I've forgotten something, the I-950 thought. As she came around to the front again, Serena saw it immediately. They were identical. She gave an exasperated hiss. This is what comes from having too many balls in the air, she thought. It was necessary to assign them both to the Sacramento facility, and they were going to draw attention with their looks. I suppose they could be twins. No, maybe brothers or cousins, but twins would cause too much comment. Immediately, she began planning what to do to differentiate them from one another. One would shave his head, the other his beard, and she'd apply a different hair color to the bald one's mustache. A Fu Manchu, she thought. She'd trim and color the eyebrows too. Some sort of stain to the skin to mimic a darker coloration should also help. The I-950 viewed the mock-up the computer part of her brain supplied with satisfaction. Then she applied dark glasses to one and half tints to the other. It would do. Especially if they weren't constantly lined up beside each other. The next pair will look different from the get-go, she vowed. It wouldn't be hard. A few minor adjustments to the cartilage matrices and different hair colors. She was pretty much stuck with the same bone structure. But there's a lot you can do with that, if you were smart enough to think of it first. She relayed instructions to the two. After they were finished, she'd set them to watching several talk and game shows that she'd recorded. Then they would listen to a half-dozen radio shows of the same type. That would give them some idea of how ordinary people spoke and their body language. She'd already downloaded maps of California and information about the Sacramento target facility, as well as a driving program. Before doing their homework, however, 6 and 7 started on the cosmetic adjustments she'd designed. Pity there wasn't time enough for corrective surgery. 4 she was sending to 2 in the outback cabin where her own replacement was breeding. It would be taking the rest of the CPU and energy cell packets with it. With the way I'm going through Terminators, it might be best to leave a few in reserve for Serena too, she thought. If it all worked out, the Connors and their allies destroyed and Cyberdyne safe, then she would probably keep the second fetus and abort the first as potentially unstable. If things went horribly wrong, she'd done her best to cover any potential outcome. 5 was young-looking enough that it wasn't absolutely identical to the other Terminators. It just looked amazingly like them. Instinct prompted her to send it to Sacramento as well. There were probably cosmetic things she could do to it to further differentiate it from its cohorts. The I-950 frowned. She could be giving the Connors more credit than they deserved here. Sending 3 Terminators, even this homegrown variety, after 2 humans was embarrassing. Yes, Perhaps she'd keep it with her at Cyberdyne. Satisfied with her decisions, Serena closed her eyes and sat back in her chair. As the two Terminators worked on their hair and eyebrows, she sorted through the day's downloaded data. Still nothing from the Connors or their ally. They were definitely avoiding the internet. Well, if they weren't updating her on their whereabouts and interests, at least she'd deprived them of an important tool. The last report she'd received from 3 indicated that it had been captured. Serena had come as close as she ever had in her life to genuine rage. How had humans captured her Terminator? Destroyed, she could understand. All they'd have to do was knock it off the plane somehow, but captured. True, 3 wasn't one of Skynet's best, but it was a damn sight better than any 3 humans, especially when one was a smallish woman and another barely more than a child. Or it should have been. Making the best of the situation, the I-950 had ordered it to erase certain portions of memory while she planted other information. Whether or not the Connors would fall for the false information remained to be seen. But they'd seemed dead set on attacking the Sacramento facility. One can only hope that they'll remain stubborn about it. She wanted to go there herself, very, very much. It would be exciting to pit herself against Skynet's 2 greatest enemies, face to face. Serena imagined herself crushing John Connor's skull between her hands, then realized she was smiling and smoothed her face to blankness. Daydreaming. That was the sort of thing a human would do. She ardently wished for the stabilizing influence of Skynet, instead of the silence in her mind. Another human response, she thought despairingly. With an effort, she pulled her thoughts away from that realization and the feelings that accompanied it. It was irrelevant. What was important was killing or capturing the Connors. Even more vital was defending Skynet from them, which she would do to the last drop of blood in her body. She would not fail. Serena opened her eyes and watched the 2 Terminators work. We will not fail. In the end, a day later, she decided to include the younger-looking 5. Serena gave him a haircut so distracting, she was certain that no adult human would be able to take their eyes off it long enough to notice its resemblance to the others. It was an upright mohawk, roach-dyed brilliant scarlet, with green bars, and tattoos on the shaved sides of his head. A pair of tiny round sunglasses that made its face look wider completed the illusion. The humans in the Sacramento facility might not like its looks, but since she'd sent it, they'd just have to rise above their feelings. One corner of her mouth lifted in satisfaction at the thought. She ordered it to slouch, and it looked like it was melting, its shoulders collapsing onto its pelvis in a move that even a human contortionist couldn't manage. Like this, the I-950 said, throwing out a hip and dropping one shoulder. It imitated her perfectly. Now walk like this. Serena moved her shoulders as she walked, pushing her pelvis just slightly forward of them, in a sort of James Dean dawdle. She looked astonishingly masculine. The Terminator duplicated her swagger. She had him walk for her, adding little bits of business and then subtracting most of them. The others she left to themselves. "All right," the I-950 said, not satisfied, but resigned. She'd done all she could for now. "Get dressed. We leave in 10 minutes. Cyberdyne Systems, the present. "Jordan?" Serena's voice came smooth as ice cream from his intercom. Yes, Serena?" he answered, laying down the report he'd been reading. "Could you come to my office, please? I think I have something for you." On my way," he answered. Jordan stood and slipped his arms into his suit jacket. When his boss said she thought she had something, she probably did. He'd taken a sneak peek at her personnel records, and her work experience sure didn't explain it. If it was life experience that gave her the edge, she must have been one wild kid. Because she was a lot younger than he was, and his own sources were fewer and far less trustworthy. Of course, she was also damned smart. You could almost feel her mind going in a dozen different directions when you were with her. It was disconcerting. And she had a knowing air about her, as though she found the scientists she was guarding rather quaint as they groped their way towards things she already knew. He nodded to Mrs. Dupre, whom he had discovered was yet another of Burns's infallible sources. She smiled at him as he tapped the door and entered to Serena's, "Come in." "Hello, Jordan," she said, smiling. 3 men seated on the couch rose as one. He glanced at them, then Serena called his attention back to herself. "I need you to take a short trip for us," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "There have been indications that the Connors are planning an attack on the Sacramento facility." Jordan went still. "Sacramento?" he said after a moment. "Why Sacramento?" Burns shrugged one shoulder. "Apparently, someone told them about it." She smiled. "Or maybe because Sacramento's a civilian facility. Who knows?" Jordan's mind flew to Teresa. Had she been in touch with the Connors? Could it have been her? It could well have been, if she'd had the information, and it was perfectly possible that she did. "When do I leave?" he asked. "Now," Serena said with a smile. "I've arranged accommodation for you in the Holiday Inn there." Her lips quirked, and she said, "It's not luxury, but then, it is Sacramento." He grinned in response. "I'm also lending you some manpower." Serena gestured towards the 3 tall men standing in front of her couch. "Tom Gallagher, Dick Lewis, and Bob Harris." The men nodded together, so Jordan couldn't tell who belonged to which name. He guessed they probably went left to right. As he looked at them, he couldn't help but think of the ancient clay warriors who guarded the tomb of China's first emperor. The same bodies lined up in the same postures, with different heads attached. "Do you need to go home and pack a bag?" Serena asked. No, Jordan said. "I've got some things in my office." It was an old habit he'd developed in the bureau, and it had saved him a lot of time and trouble over the years. He'd decided to continue it here until he knew just what this job entailed. "Good," she said. She handed him a folder, which on examination proved to contain addresses and phone numbers for the hotel and the storage site, as well as directions to both places. "Let me know when you arrive," she said. She touched him lightly on the arm. "I wish I could tell you more than, 'I think they're coming,' but right now, that's all I've got. If anything else comes down the pipe, I'll call you immediately." "Okay," he said. He looked at the three men. "I guess you guys ride with me." They nodded in unison. He smiled, a little nervously. These guys are weird, he thought. Formidable enough, certainly. They bulged with muscle and they moved well despite their massive size. But weird. And they were all ironed, with shoulder holsters under a baggy sweatsuit jacket, a suit, and a leather affair with chains. "Stop echoing each other's movements," Serena sent. "Remember, you are supposed to be individuals." She almost sighed in exasperation as their heads turned towards her as one. "Okay, guys, good luck," she said aloud. The I-950 shut the door behind her minions with something like resignation. It was pretty much out of her hands now. What would be, would be. "I guess I'll have to be grateful that Dyson can't suspect them of being Terminators, because Terminators don't exist." She smiled. Being a figment of a deranged imagination made it so much easier to hide. Humans censored their own perceptions for you. They didn't talk. Jordan had tried a few questions to loosen things up, and they had answered, but as tersely as possible. They weren't even personal questions, for crying out loud. They were so quiet that he could almost forget they were there, except for the way they moved their heads in constant overlapping arcs. They looked like a trio of lighthouses inexplicably built on the same promontory. Their bodies were so still that they might have been paralyzed from the neck down. No scratches, no twitches, no shifting. After a short while, their constant head motion, combined with their dead silence, began to wear on him. "Are you even breathing?" he said to the one beside him. "Bob?" he thought. Seven consulted a subroutine in charge of imitating respiratory function. It appeared to be working at optimum. Visual observation confirmed the monitor data. "Yes," it said. Jordan glanced at him. Just yes, he thought. What was their damn problem? Were they having a fight or something? Was this some sort of group sulk that he'd walked into? "Okay, that's about enough of this shit." "Look," he said aloud, and three heads turned, three pairs of eyes aimed at him like howitzers. Jordan's mouth twitched, and he frowned. Man, these boys have some attitude. "I don't know if Ms. Burns briefed you on Sarah Connor, so I don't know if you're aware of what a tough, well-trained customer she is." "We know about Sarah Connor," Bob said. "Good," Jordan said, "'cause I sure as hell wouldn't want to bore you gentlemen by repeating anything you've already heard. But you see, the problem is, I don't know what you know, and I don't know anything about you three guys. And since we might be facing some pretty dicey situations together, I'd like to know a little more about you, okay? Bob looked at him. Jordan glanced in the rear-view mirror. Tom and Dick looked at him. Nobody spoke. "Don't all jump in at once," he said sarcastically. "Would anybody like to tell me how long you've been with Cyberdyne, or what your training is, or why I should have you as my backup team?" "I have a headache," they all said at once. Then they returned to their lighthouse intimidation, as one. Then it hit him. Burns had introduced them as Tom, Dick, and Harris. Was that some sort of joke? Had she hired some kind of freelance hit squad to take out the Connors? Could she be a sociopath? He wondered. Not good, he thought. Not good at all. He could be wrong. He could be making mountains out of molehills, but these men were not normal. He knew nothing about them except their names and the fact that they were carrying Cyberdyne Rent-A-Cop IDs and had licenses for the guns. Israeli Desert Eagle 50 calibers at that. Hand cannons. Usually, he despised anyone who carried the things. The engineering was excellent. The Israelis were the world's best practical weaponeers. But the caliber was too big for accuracy. The sort of gun macho blowhards with little tiny dicks bought because they thought it made them bad. These gorillas looked as if they could actually shoot the damned things. Roy's Diner, just outside Sacramento, the present. "Hey, something just occurred to me," John said, pushing aside the second-rate Huevos Rancheros. Dieter and his mother had been ignoring each other studiously. John hid his smile at the obvious electricity between them. About time Mom found somebody, he thought. And I've got a good feeling about this guy. If a human could be Uncle Bob, Dieter would be it. They probably thought it was a big secret, even from each other. From the smile on her tired face, even the waitress here was picking it up. Now they looked at him. He unfolded his laptop, fingers flicking over the keyboard and trackpad, then swiveled it around. "You know, one thing has always bothered me about this time travel shit, the war against the machines and all that stuff." "One thing?" Dieter said, raising an eyebrow. "Well, a lot of stuff. But one thing that my dad told Mom. You know, those plasma weapons he wished he had? The ones that fried Terminators good?" Sarah nodded, a brief flicker of sadness moving like a wave across the tight-held tension of her face at the mention of Kyle. "Yes," she said. "Well, when did they get invented? Like, originally, Judgment Day was supposed to have happened by now." Dieter frowned. "I hadn't thought," he said. "I just assumed that the future would have more formidable weaponry." "Maybe Skynet invented them," Sarah said, stirring the remains of her limp bacon around the plate with a fork. "Maybe," John said, "but it's awfully advanced stuff, even so. Look at what I downloaded from the Terminator's memory. Here's a schematic for a..." He pointed to the text below the diagram. "Phased plasma rifle in the 40 kilowatt range. Energy storage cell, perfect dielectric. This is a Buck Rogers in the 25th century, ain't no doubt about it, blaster, man." "Yes," Dieter said. "Well, it occurs to me This information traveled back from the future, right? And we figure some sort of super Terminator is watching over the birth of Skynet at Cyberdyne, right? The older heads nodded. So, John went on triumphantly, taking a bite out of a piece of leathery toast spread with pseudo butter. I figure the information came back with the Terminators. Like, nobody invented it. It's in Skynet's memory because Skynet in the future sent it back. And Skynet in the future has it because it was there because... My head hurts, Sarah said plaintively. I need more coffee. They fell silent as the waitress came over with a pot in each hand, regular and decaf. Time to go, John said at last. Let's get radical. Sacramento, the present. Advanced technology systems, John said. Or butt-ugly Bauhaus office building. Dieter snorted. Would you prefer fake gingerbread? He asked softly. Then, his voice all business. Go. Sarah Connor crossed the street, looking as casual as a woman carrying a raincoat in a California summer could look. The bored rent-a-cop sitting at the semicircular security desk in the faux marble lobby looked up politely as she approached. The smile turned gelid as her combat shotgun came out from under the coat. Hands where I can see them. Scoot back, yeah, right back, away from the alarm pedal you were about to step on, asshole. Do it now! She sat on the curved surface of the desktop and swung her legs to the other side, then held the shotgun one-handed as she pulled a roll of heavy duct tape out of the pocket of her khaki hiking pants. Lie down, she said, as she stripped the length off with her teeth. Time for a nap. Convenient, Dieter von Rossbach said, as he put the bolt cutters against the pipe-enclosed conduit that ran down the aluminium siding of the building facing the alleyway. Welcome to California, where everything's above board, John said. He turned his head as a shower of sparks spat out of the severed cables. Inside, the building would be dark except for a few emergency lights, and the phones would be cut off, and the data link to the computers that handled Cyberdyne's storage. Not that it would matter much. There wasn't supposed to be anybody in the building this early, except for the security staff. Go, he said, clipping the leads from his laptop's highly modified modem onto the bare wires of the exposed telephone line. His fingers danced over the keyboard, dumping Cyberdyne's security codes and a set of very pointed commands into the machine's idiot savant brain. Dieter picked up the heavy duffel bag and slung it over his back, reached up and began to haul his massive body up the pipe conduit, hand over hand. At the second floor, he swung out and kicked at a window. It was tough glass and not meant to be opened. The impact thudded back into his torso, with a twinge that reminded him he'd never see 40 again. A second kick, and the window frame and the shattered glass it had held punched into the corridor. Dieter swung through, the Heckler & Koch submachine gun in his massive fist, probing about as if it were a toy pistol. Clear, he said, looking down at John. The boy, young man, he reminded himself, remembering the Terminator on the plane, grinned up and gave him a thumbs up. We got into the office, John said. There's a physical barrier, like I thought, but it should be pretty straightforward from there. All right, Dieter said, lowering a rope. It's a good thing the Connors aren't really terrorists. They'd have given the sector a run for its money. John swarmed up with a loose-limbed gracefulness. He handed Dieter the laptop, which he shoved into the knapsack slung across his shoulder and chest. They moved down the corridor cautiously. Front secured, Sarah Connor called from the stairwell. We'll cover John from both ends of the corridor while he works on the lock. John grinned again as he worked on the e-lock of a steel slab door labelled Advanced Technology Systems. Insert stolen identity card here. Trigger subroutine. There we go. Dieter had never seen a man move as fast as John did when the door swung open and a massive figure who might have been Dieter with a bald head and a Fu Manchu mustache, stepped through. The younger Connor dove aside, his hand coming up with a weapon like a stubby shotgun. The Austrian knew it was a grenade launcher. It flashed with a hollow chunk, but not before the big automatic in the Terminator's hand barked. The leopard grace of John's leap turned into a crumpled fall, one hand going to his side. Things happened very rapidly after that. Dieter flung himself backward, emptying the full 35-round magazine of his machine pistol into the Terminator's chest and stomach. It staggered, turned, fired. The bullet struck close enough to Dieter's head to send chips of wallboard flying into his eyes. He rolled backward, blinking and shaking his head frantically as he slapped in another magazine into the weapon. Sarah's shotgun boomed behind him. And 2 more Terminators came out of the office, guns extended, taking the heavy recoil of the 50 caliber automatics as if they were children's water pistols. All 3 turned towards John. Dieter braced himself to hurl his own body between the young man and death, to give him a few seconds' armor. Behind him, he heard Sarah's incredulous scream. Another man came out of the office, a tall, slim black man with a Glock in his hand. "Are you insane?" he shouted at the Terminator in the lead, forcing himself between the killer machine and the wounded human. "Get them!" he snapped. "I'll look after the prisoner. Now!" He bent over John. The Terminators froze, motionless, their eyes on the black man, their guns halted in mid-arc. A lifetime of confronting merciless necessity and making the decisions he had to had trained Dieter as much as the academies and courses. He dove from the concealing shelter of the office doorway and into the stairwell, scooping Sarah up as he passed, and plunged downward to the lobby. Dieter dragged her to the car and pushed her into the passenger seat. He pulled the seatbelt across her body and strapped her in, then slammed the door and ran around to the driver's side. Sarah closed her eyes and clung to the armrests, breathing through her teeth in harsh, tearing gasps as she tried to get her sobbing under control. Her throat felt as though she'd swallowed a sharp stone, and after a moment she could neither indulge in the relief of weeping nor stop the pain. When she opened her eyes, she could see clearly. No tears obscured the road from her view. Sarah concentrated on her breathing, on calming herself, on tearing her mind away from the awful repeated image of her son falling and the blood. On to the next thing, she ordered herself. What comes next. We have to destroy Cyberdyne's main facility now, she said to Dieter. Her voice was thick and tense, but under the circumstances, it sounded amazingly calm. Von Rossbach's jaw worked. It would almost have felt better to have her throwing accusations at him. He glanced at her, then looked back at the road. I have no desire to commit suicide, Sarah, he said firmly. If we're going for Cyberdyne, I'll need a day at least to set it up. We still need to find out exactly where it is. What do I need him for? Sarah wondered numbly, staring straight ahead. Listening to him has screwed this up from the get-go. If she was genuinely paranoid, as she'd been diagnosed, she'd suspect von Rossbach of being sent by Skynet. But she couldn't blame him for this mess. She'd gone along with every suggestion, allowing herself to be persuaded against her better judgment. There's nobody to blame for that except myself, she thought. Her eyes slid sideways, regarding the man beside her. He might yet be useful. She could scarcely walk into Cyberdyne property all by herself. Slowly, she dragged herself back up onto her metaphorical feet. The wound might feel mortal, but she wasn't close to dead yet. Something those bastards at Cyberdyne were going to learn, to their sorrow. Sarah Connor was a long way from defeated.